Recording and Zoom Live has been started.
Allah, you are on mute. You will have to, yeah, as and when you decide to begin.
Should we begin or should we wait for another couple of minutes?
What are we waiting for, Balaji?
No, sir. We were just waiting for people to join in. Otherwise, we can start. Should we start?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So uh, it's my privilege to welcome all of you on behalf of this 100-year-old department, the Mumbai School of Economics and Public Policy. Today happens to be a day with mixed feelings. On the one hand, it's a day when Mumbai witnessed terror attacks and mayhem was unleashed in the city. We pay our respects to the departed souls to start off with. On the other hand, it's also a day when we celebrate our constitution, the Samvidhan Divas, an important day indeed in the history of our nation. It's pure coincidence that we firmed up today on having this particular program, but it's indeed befitting to have a discussion on the future of Indian education system on this particular day. Even before I welcome our main speaker for today, Dr. Narendra Jadhav, who is our own alumnus, let me start off by welcoming Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath, who is our guest for the first time. Uh, she's one of our two discussants. Thank you very much, ma'am, for agreeing to be as a part of our program. A very warm welcome to you. A hearty welcome to Dr. Narendra Jadhav, around whose book we are going to revolve our discussion for today. Professor Pete, the other discussant for today, is a part of our own department. And since one doesn't welcome or thank the host, I will refrain from doing both of them. In the audience, let me extend a very warm welcome to our past directors, our alumni, teachers from various colleges across the city of Mumbai, officers from Reserve Bank and other institutions who have joined in. A big welcome to all of you. The way that we have structured today's program is that Dr. Jadhav will speak for 20 minutes on his book, and then we will have the two discussants speak for about 15 to 20 minutes each on issues emanating from the book. And time permitting, we'll have some questions which you can put in the chat box. And if they are specifically meant for either of the discussants, then you could mention it. Otherwise, it would be for Dr. Jadhav. So if you can write that out, that would help. I'm going to keep track of the questions and I won't be able to take all, but a couple of them we will definitely try and do the needful with that. So let me start off by beginning with an introduction of Professor Jadhav. Dr. Narendra Jadhav, Member of Parliament of Rajya Sabha, nominated. He's an economist, education, academic, administrator, and author in English, Marathi, Hindi, and wears many hats. He's a celebrated public figure with 70 national and international awards, 4 honorary D.Litt degrees in 4 different states, the Thomas Hart Benton Morrell Medallion, that's the President's Medal from Indiana University of USA, and above all, the title of Commander of Order of Academic Palms of the Government of France. As a career economist, Dr. Jadhav has worked for over 30 years with the Reserve Bank of India and other central banks. He also has worked as an advisor to International Monetary Fund, has been the chief economist of RBI. In 2006, Dr. Jadhav was appointed as the Vice Chancellor of the University of Pune. Within 3 years, he transformed the university into a vibrant and dynamic center of excellence, which singularly contributed to making it the most favored destination for foreign students coming to India. The vision of Dr. Jadhav had articulated and operationalized for Pune University led him to the Planning Commission as member in charge of the Education, Labor, Employment, Social Justice Empowerment, and as a member of the National Advisory Council. As member of Planning Commission, Dr. Jadhav has played an important role in formulating the 12th five-year plan, especially in respect of education, skill development. His contribution to formulation of the ambitious scheme titled RUSA, as well as for developing the ecosystem for skill development in India, is recognized all over. As member of the National Advisory Council, Dr. Jadhav's notable contributions include implementation of the right to education and the empowerment of SC/ST minorities and DTNTs. He has 41 books in 3 languages. He has worked as distinguishing professor at the Council for Social Development, a visiting professor at Ashoka University and Indian School of Business, Professor Emeritus, MIT School of Government, and a Master in Masters Union Business School. So it's not for nothing that Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath said that we are in awe of Dr. Jadhav and have little to add. So Professor Jadhav has a perfect blend of experience, been part of the government, he's been at the helm of a university and a teacher. No one better than him to give us insights into the future of Indian education system. Let me also, while I'm doing the introduction, we have a distinguished panel. So let me do the introduction of the two panelists also, and then we will get down to starting off the discussion. So Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath is the founder director of WISCOM. That's a convergence of wisdom and compassion. It's been a pioneer in initiating the discourse on women, peace, and security in South Asia. She's also the chair of Board of Governors, Center for Policy Research, principal emerita of the very well-known Lady Shri Ram College, and has been associated with it for 26 years. She was the first woman to serve as member of the National Security Advisory Board of India. In recognition of her contribution to the field of women's education and empowerment, she has received several awards, including the Padma Shri Award. Other awards which have been bestowed upon her include the Indira Priyadarshini Gandhi Award, the Rajiv Gandhi Award for Excellence in Education, the Mahila Shiromani Award, and the Delhi Citizen Forum Award, the Quimpro Platinum Standard Award for Education and Celebrating Womanhood, South Asian Region, Award for Social Harmony and International Lifetime Achievement for outstanding work in the field of justice. She has been awarded the honorary doctorate degree of letters for significant contribution to the education of women and commitment to fostering global peace through conflict resolution, La Trobe University, Australia. Dr. Gopinath serves on the governing board of several research institutes, NGOs, educational institutions, corporate bodies. She's also a member of the Nonviolent Peace Force International on Council of UN Peace, a UN mandated university. So in Dr. Gopinath, we have a distinguished personality with vast experience again in the field of education. The other accomplished panelist that we have today is Professor Abhay Pethe, a teacher in the university for over 30 years, vast experience on several administrative bodies of the university and colleges. Professor Pethe hardly needs any introduction to this audience, as most of us are either his students or his friends, and it's my privilege to fall into both the categories. Currently Senior Resident Fellow at the Mumbai School of Economics. And from the point of view of today's discussion, an important designation is that he's a member of the task force under Dr. Mashelkar looking at the implementation of NEP in Maharashtra. He was director of this autonomous department, the in-charge director of Rajiv Gandhi Center, the chair professor occupying Dr. Vibhuti Shukla Chair in Urban and Regional Economics. He's been the dean of the Faculty of Arts, a member of the Management Council of the University, a member of the Governing Board and Academic Council of TIS. He chairs the Economics Board at Wellingker Institute of Management and Research, currently member of the Management Board of Gokhale Institute. He's been a consultant to various private sector organizations, governmental international organizations, the RBI, Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, World Bank, UNDP, worked on the steering committee for higher and technical education of Planning Commission, Government of India in the 12th five-year plan, member of the High Part Committee set up by the government of Maharashtra to get into the regional imbalance under Dr. Vijay Kelkar. He's also been a member of the High Part Committee to look at the Nana refinery, senior consultant to UNICEF, the CRISIL IDFC Institute. So with our main speaker, as well as both panelists being accomplished teachers, researchers with vast experience at college and university level, today's discussion promises to be a very exciting one. With this, let me welcome Dr. Narendra Jadhav and to request him to take over.
Thank you. Thank you, Malaji. Professor Mala, distinguished panelist, Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath, Professor Abhay Pethe, and friends. At the very outset, let me give my best wishes to all of you for Samvidhan Day and to all. And ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a great pleasure as well as an honor and to be here on this platform to talk about the future of Indian education system. This is the book that we are going to talk about. At least I'm going to start with this book is going to be instrumental in discussing the future of India's education system. And in that context, what is the relevance of the National Education Policy 2020? Well, friends, after a gap of 34 years, a new National Education Policy 2020 was announced on July 29th, 2020. The National Education Policy 2020 is a culmination of a long-drawn process, and it is primarily built on the Herculean effort in the form of the Draft New Education Policy 2019, or the so-called Kasturirangan Committee report. The committee report is very big, 446 pages, that too magazine size, whereas the policy proper is only 60 pages. So it is a concise, sharp, and a slick kind of document. Most of the path-breaking and transformative reforms in the Indian education system that were proposed in the Draft Education Policy 2019 have seemingly been approved by the new National Education Policy 2020. And that's why I want to start with the Kasturirangan report or the Draft National Education Policy 2019. My comments, my initial remarks are going to be focused on four different aspects. First, I will talk about the Kasturirangan report, the positives, the negatives, and so on. The second aspect is that what are the entirely new proposals in the new in the National Education Policy 2020 vis-a-vis the Kasturirangan Committee report. Third aspect that I want to talk about, what important proposals which were there in the Kasturirangan Committee report which have been either modified or diluted or deleted in the National Education Policy 2020. And finally, I'm going to address the issue, what is still missing in the National Education Policy 2020. So let's start with the Kasturirangan Committee report. Kasturirangan Committee report, it's a monumental document. The sheer enormity of the work and effort that has gone into this report is indeed awe-inspiring. That's the first positive. Secondly, the Kasturirangan report, it aims at evolving an India-centric education system, emphasizing India's rich cultural heritage and values such as liberty, equality, fraternity, and justice, which are enshrined in the Constitution, in our Constitution, which is very apt for the discussion on the Constitution Day. The third positive about this report is that the Kasturirangan Committee's report attempts to build a framework for universal and equitable access to broad-based, high-quality education. That's a broad positive comment that I want to make about the Kasturirangan report. Let's talk about the negatives now. On the other hand, the first negative, it's not necessarily negative, but first point that I want to make against the policy, it's not a draft policy at all. Although the title of Kasturirangan Committee report is the Draft New Education Policy 2019, it is not a draft policy at all. It is simply Kasturirangan Committee report. Second, the Kasturirangan Committee report is based on a very large number of consultations. More than 3 lakhs people individuals, institutions, groups were consulted, and this report is coming out of that. However, the report does not have any structured analysis foundation. Is there some problem there? Is there some problem there? Okay, I will continue.
Yeah.
The report does not have any structured analytical foundation or statistical basis which can support the recommendations, which will buttress the recommendations made in the report. While the recommendations are path-breaking, there is no sound analytical structure or statistical basis for making those recommendations. That is the second point that I want to make. The third point that I want to make is that Kasturangan Committee report sets out several time-bound quantitative targets, such as universal participation in school education by 2030, achieving gross enrollment ratio of 50% in higher education by the year 2035, and so on. However, please note that there are no clear-cut objective roadmaps leading to those achievement of those stated targets. In absence of any concrete course of action or programs of actions to achieve those laudable, very noble quantitative targets, the claims made by the Kasturangan Committee, they boil down to not much more than what can be called lofty intentions. So without providing a proper up-to-date educational status report for people to gauge the economy of the enormity of the changes proposed, this report is seriously lacking there. The fourth one, there are a number of things which will come in the school education as well as in higher education. I will come to that very quickly. It's a very, very good idea that the ECCE, that is Early Child Education and Care, is being integrated as a part of school education. This is a great idea. This has been a long-standing demand. However, there is no compelling reason to change the pedagogical structure of school education in India. What they have done is that with the ECCE, with the early education, with the pre-primary education, they have put together standard 1 and standard 2, class 1 and class 2, together with pre-primary. No country in the world, nowhere in the world, such an artificial combination has been made. So it's a good idea to have ECCE as the part of the mainstream of school education. Wonderful. But clubbing it together and separating first and second grade, clubbing it with early education, and making that change in the pedagogical structure, I don't think there is any rational basis for that. Then there is a misdiagnosis of learning crisis. Kasturangan report does not recognize the elephant in the room. For example, the real problem about the learning crisis in our country is poor school and teacher accountability. The report, however, makes no mention of teachers' absenteeism, low teacher efforts as a key problem, and therefore there is a misdiagnosis, seemingly misdiagnosis of learning crisis. The next one is that there is a provision for census exams at 3rd grade, 5th grade, and 8th grade. Now, this is something which originally, when the Right to Education Act was passed and became effective in 2010, 1st April 2010, at that time there was no detention policy was envisaged. But later, there was an amendment made to the Right to Education Act, and they brought back the examinations at the level of 5th and 8th grade. And now we are going back again with virtually no exam. So virtually we are going back to, no detention policy. This kind of flip-flop is something which is undesirable, to say the least. There has been a reorganization of the school complexes, great idea, but there would be many practical constraints. In higher education, the report is talking about raising the GER, the gross enrollment ratio, to 50% by 2035. This is good, but it is not overly ambitious because it's already way below the global average, and global average is also going to rise, so it's not overly ambitious. Restructuring the higher educational institution, which is again very artificial construct, set of institutions, type 1, type 2, type 3. Only type 1 and type 2 would be doing research. Type 3 would be confined only to teaching. The distinction between research and teaching, this is artificial. They go necessarily together. There is no logical reason why type 3 institutions or colleges be confined to teaching alone and not encouraged to undertake research. Again, all higher educational institutions would be either universities or autonomous colleges. This again is a very good provision, but very difficult to implement in immediate future. So that's the first stage of my comments. Now I come to what is really entirely new proposal. Kasturirangan report, I have given you positives and negatives. Now let's talk about what are the entirely new proposals that have come up in the National Education Policy 2020 vis-a-vis the Kasturirangan Committee report. First, there, entirely new idea, new system, mother tongue as a medium of instruction. Now, this could become very controversial, but basically the point is well made that the medium of instruction, at least until grade 5, but preferably till grade 8 and beyond, will be home language or mother tongue or local language or regional language. This is the first completely new change made. The language is slightly confusing. Continuation of 3-language formula is also welcome. So this is a welcome suggestion, but it can be legally, it can create a problem. The second entirely new thing that has come up is the creation of National Assessment Center, and they have given a wonderful name. They always give very good names to the schemes. PARAK, that is the Performance Assessment, Review and Analysis of Knowledge for Holistic Development. PARAK will act as a standard-setting body under MHRD and fulfill the basic objectives of setting norms, standards, and guidelines, etc. Now, this is a very, very good new idea that has come up in the National Education Policy, which was not there in the Kasturirangan Committee report. The third one, and this is a very, very good idea, that there would be multidisciplinary higher educational institutions with multiple exit options and academic bank of credit. Now, this is something which was required for a very long time. The artificial distinction between the arts, science, and commerce will go once for all. I've been talking about this ad nauseum from 2006 onwards. Students can select the subjects of their choice across the streams and earn credit, and the academic credits that they earn would be digitally stored in academic bank of credit. This would facilitate earning credits from different higher educational institutions, which can be transferred across educational institutions towards a desired degree. This was a reform which was much needed and long awaited. Multiple exit options is also a very, very good idea. If a student leaves after 1 year, he or she gets a certificate. One who leaves after 2 years gets a diploma. One who leaves after completing 3 or 4 years, he or she will get a bachelor's degree in all areas, including vocational and professional area. So this is another very, very good addition that has been made by the National Education Policy 2020 to the Kasturirangan Committee report. The third set of proposals that I want to talk about, what are the ideas, what are the proposals which were there in the Kasturirangan Committee report, but they have been deleted or modified by the National Education Policy 2020. First, very important, the RTA Act. The RTA Act came after a long battle, and it was passed, it became effective, operational on 1st April 2020. It has still not been 2010. In the last 10 years, it is still not implemented very clearly and adequately. It has certainly not been implemented satisfactorily. And the Kasturirangan Committee report actually talked about diluting it further. Now, that would have been a disaster. It would have been a major, socially counterproductive scheme to go back and dilute the right to education act further. Fortunately, the policy 2020, National Education Policy 2020, doesn't mention that, and I hope that it has been dropped. The second one is National Education Commission. The Kasturirangan Committee report talks about establishing a National Education Commission at the central government level, at the central level, and State Education Commission at the state level. This provision has been changed by the National Education Policy 2020, while there will be a National Education Commission at the central level, at the federal level. There would be no state education commissions. What will there be would be the departments of school education would become the apex body for the school at the state schooling system at the state level. Now, this change is going to be a hard sell with many state governments who will see this as the running contour to the spirit of cooperative and consultative federalism. For the state, originally education was the state subject. It was only later that it came into concurrent list. So this is going to be a very sensitive issue. What they have provided for in the National Education Policy is to strengthen the Central Advisory Board of Education, or CABE. That would be strengthened, but how far that would appease the states remains to be seen. The third change that the National Education Policy 2020 has made vis-a-vis the Kasturirangan Committee report is about financing. And this is a completely retrograde step has been taken in the National Education Policy 2020. It does talk about the ever elusive goal of, it talks about continuously talks about the elusive goal of 6% of GDP expenditure on education as a equivalent to of 6% of GDP. However, Kasturirangan Committee had also stated that in addition to that, they had stated that the expenditure on education as the ratio of the total expenditure must be raised from 10% to 20%. This one has been completely deleted or dropped in the National Education Commission, National Education Policy. I think that is a socially counterproductive step. Final point is what is still missing in the new Education Policy 2020. What stands out there is the out-of-school children. There are 80 million out-of-school children in the age group of 6 to 18, and 44 million of those have never been to the school. And only 36 million have been in the school, but they have been dropped out. And there is the report policy makes only a passing reference that we must give top priority to bringing these children back into the educational fold as early as possible. But regrettably, there is no concrete action or plan of action or a strategic plan of action to achieve this all-important goal. And then there is also missing is a transition to education 4.0 with the industrial revolution 4.0. There is a major change needed to education 4.0 that is missing. And the final point that I want to make is the Constitution. This is the Constitution Day. The report talks about the constitutional values, but Constitution needs to be brought into the mainstream. And I feel that it should become a compulsory subject at the high school level, Constitution and civics together. And that is needed far more than ever before. And that is something that is required to generate socially conscientious citizens of this country. And that is something that is missing. So in all, I would say that the new education policy 2020, and this is the last point, has a great potential to be a critical turning point and a massive game changer in completely transforming the education ecosystem in India towards the world class, and in the process lay the foundation of new India of 21st century, provided that the the massive framework presented is fine-tuned further, as has been discussed. And secondly, there must be a detailed time-bound program of action. And three, there must be governments, both state as well as central governments, must make concerted efforts to raise the public expenditure on education as a percentage of country GDP to 6% as early as possible. And the fourth one is private sector must respond positively to the so-called light but tight regulation and make honest disclosures, self-disclosures in all aspects of their educational aspirations. And finally, the central government and all states must and should effectively collaborate, going beyond the political party lines, on the meticulous and effective implementation of the new National Education Policy 2020. And our future depends on it, literally. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jadhav. May I now request Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath to take over. Dr. Meenakshi.
Well, it's a great honor to participate in this confluence as you celebrate your centennial year, and also be able to share the panel with the iconic Professor Narendra Jadhav and the really distinguished Professor Pete. I feel extremely sort of almost intimidated with the wisdom around the table, but thank you ever so much. And I really want to commend the Mumbai School for actually living out the vision that Professor Jadhav has spoken about in terms of what a world-class institution can purport to be. And not to mention the fact that you're looking at international collaborations, excellence of research, commitment, the values that your students are expected to embody. And of course, above all, your very distinguished alumni, including Professor Meghanand Desai, Nitin Desai, Narendra Jadhav, Mala Lalwani, and Professor Bhipete, among others. So it's a real honor for me. And I want to thank Professor Jadhav in particular for the panoramic vision that he has put out in this amazing book, which is here with me, and for really sifting and making the policy or the draft recommendations speak to us in a coherent sort of way, in a way sifting the grain from the chaff, what they call Nirashira Vibheda. And also presenting the sensibilities that went into its making. He's already outlined the monumental effort, the wide consultation, and actually bringing on board the consultations and the discussions in the public domain that happened between 86-92 till the formulation, and its earlier avatar, the Subramaniam report, on to the draft 2019. But he's made this speak to us in such a succinct and clear way that I would really recommend, I'm not his sales agent, but I would certainly recommend that this book be compulsory reading in just about, not just universities here, but also the world over. Because it's about how do we make our society, young people, worlds ready and futures ready. And also about how do they see themselves or begin to craft themselves as responsible citizens of a so-called new India while being global citizens. But very politely, Dr. Jadhav has asked, while he's talking about the fact that it is a metamorphic change on the scenario of higher education, he asks this very pertinent question, what is the plan of action to operationalize this laudable action point? I mean, as he mentioned, it is It is full of lofty intentions, very honorable intentions. And it's important because it was for the first time that the discourse on education has had such a buy-in. You will know, all of you will know that almost two out of every three webinars today is on the national education policy. Ever since August, there have been hundreds of them, a lot of them discussing various aspects, because it is really a multi-dimensional and almost sort of a mosaic of several trends into a tapestry, which is a little difficult to deconstruct. So I do want to say that the lofty principles are important, that the buy-in, which is astonishing, that it's entered the public discourse, which was initially never even on the manifestos of political parties. Suddenly, everyone is talking about education. Of course, Professor Yadav, during his tenure in the Planning Commission, had seen to it that the plan had become, for the first time, at least for higher education, an education plan. And we are all very grateful because the allocation that went for the first time into higher education was truly unprecedented. The other very important underlying philosophy of this, both the draft as well as, of course, the plan, the accepted policy, is that education is a public good. So it did make that very important statement, given the fact that today almost 60% of our technical and professional institutions are in the private sector. It could be private investment for the public good, which is something that universities like Harvard and so on do, and his own university at Indiana. So basically, the fact that education is a public good, and as he rightly iterated, even though RTE is somehow sort of in the shadows, that education is not charity, it is a right. It is a right based on justice. So personally, I am delighted that the UG space, the undergraduate space, which has been so long invisibilized between discussions on school education and university education, suddenly has received some visibility in both the draft and the document. And it because of the 37.4 odd million youngsters in higher education, 80% inhabit this space, the undergrad. This is where the majority of the so-called demographic dividend resides. It is also the place which is increasingly, on account of reservations and other policies of government, has become a very heterogeneous space. It is a space full of aspiration, but it is also a space that is differentiated, heterogeneous. So both the trials, the tribulations, the challenges, here are young people who are experiencing the joys of autonomy for the first time, the joys, the understanding civic participation, citizenship, coming to terms with not very easy identities, and for the first time learning the process of, in some senses, attempting to live together at the UNESCO goals had talked about. And this is not an easy task. Given the fact, as Professor Yadav's book has told you, and even the Asar report tells you, that in high school, the Asar report, the Pratham report of Asar, the annual report on education, tells you that the majority of children in grade, at the age of 12 to 14, cannot even read. They do not have basic skills. So here comes into the undergraduate space, which is a very fecund space, I'll say, a host of people with millennial aspirations, but very little skills that can enable them to navigate this very complex and variegated universe. So this is, and you will know, all of you know, that today there are around 45 to 50,000 colleges in the country. And in 13 years, that is from 2000 to 2001 to 2014, for example, the number of colleges increased from 12,806 to 39,671. That was the quantum leap in colleges. And you therefore know that to some extent, some were small, some were uneven, the quality was questionable. In Madhya Pradesh alone, for example, and it has the dubious, I wouldn't say, well, the distinction of opening an average of 5 colleges every week between 2013 and 2014. And Dr. Jadhav, I remember somewhere you had written that this mushrooming was not really helping the image of the undergraduate space. He's spoken about the 3 tiers, and I too endorse that, this artificial distinction where only one group can aspire to be on Mount Meru. By the way, it's called Meru, the highest tier of the, and why is it? Because higher education is all about technique, but it's also about phronesis, and it's also about praxis. And at all levels, both research and teaching must coalesce to bring out both the critical inquiry that is so necessary, as well as to absorb what the discipline is really trying to say. So I do, of course, here welcome the possibility that the plan lays out that every college can aspire to be a university. As he has himself said, as when he was Vice Chancellor at Savitribai Phule, he found that there was excellent research happening at the college level, but that was never recognized because of the polarities of this discourse, talking only either about school or about university. And this very fecund space has been left out. Along with Meru, I do want to say there are several outstanding examples of research, but if you look at the various bodies and the acronyms that exist for initiatives in the higher education space, there's somebody who's very inventive there who comes up with these amazing acronyms. For example, there's something called Imprint, which is impacting research, innovation, and technology. There is Impress, there is Star, there is Spark, there is Gyan, there is Stride, and so on and so forth. And it goes. There is CARE. CARE is the Committee for Academic Research and Ethics. So in fact, all this should build an exceptional climate for quality education. And yet, alongside that, we have what is called predator journals and commercially driven PhDs that are on sale. If you go to the Shodh platform, for example, they have actually these distinction, and it's different from the 3-tiered hierarchization of higher education. But it's very interesting. I just share this with you. For genuine quality, where there is only 15% plagiarism, the sale is for 55,000 for every PhD. And for normal, what is called normal quality, it after a P factor, that is the plagiarism factor is 35%, the sale is for 35,000 per PhD. So we also have this reality when we are talking about sort of a world-class global institutions. That is our aspiration. But there are some excellent suggestions, as Professor Jadhav has said. I will speak to just a few of them because there is so much in Professor Jadhav's book that I'd say every 5 pages provides topic for a 1-hour webinar at least. Now there is a lot of talk about Nalanda and Takshila, and the essence of which, especially in the Buddhist sort of dialectics, the essence of which was dialogue, discussion, debate, Vad Vivad and Samvad. However, the dialogue was not just between the already converted. It was to present your hypotheses to people from other schools of thought so that you withstood the rigor of sort of logical reasoning. It was a whole tradition of public reasoning which had to stand up to that kind of rigorous scrutiny. Now, that is something that I think we need to be very mindful of. The other aspect is, and for me, it's a little disappointing, that among the plethora of very, very impressive studies that have been suggested, new courses, very exciting courses, as Professor Jadhav said, there is very little that keeps in mind the contemporary fractured nature of our society. How do we restore the canvas of coexistence that was once, in a sense, perhaps not so long ago, a part of the warp and weft of our public understanding of what India is today? So there is nothing on, for example, conflict resolution or peace building as an area of study, which is burgeoning everywhere else today, especially as the world faces a kind of decline of multilateralism across the world. But I will really come back to just a few issues that I have flagged. And Mala, please let me know. I have this tendency not to keep track of time. Just let me know when I'm running out of time. For the transformatory vision of NEP to optimally result in the opening of the Indian mind, I feel we need to, in some senses, de-school, as Ivan Illich said, de-school society, and retrieve the idea of the academy. And when I speak primarily of the higher education space. So we must provide, the academy must provide for ruminative spaces, it must provide for aspirational spaces, dialogic spaces, inclusive and collaborative spaces. Inclusion is a big theme in Professor Jadhav's book. Democratic spaces, I would say, as a woman and also as someone who's part of this larger community, engendered spaces, and also spaces to envision a borderless world. Now, the future of the Indian education system as a world-class system that can give to the global intellectual commons a uniqueness in the space of ideas lies in its ability to translate these very, very important, shall I say, essential foundational ideas to the academy. The second thing I do want to talk about is, and Professor Jadhav has alluded to these in his book, but he has, as I said, been very polite in his book, very considerate, let me put it, for all the enormous work that's gone into the policy formulation. There are inherent tensions even within the policy. And there are dilemmas, or it's possibly that I have read into them things that I didn't expect to have. However, these did come up for me as I was going through them. The dilemmas are very much related to the kind of practical issues that we confront today. The decentralizing impulse and the impulse to standardize. There is that innate tension there. I don't know if Professor Yadav will agree with me. Then there is the role of the public and the private sector. He talked about the fact that the finances allocation is very poor. He said that even the computation of the allocations was wrong because actually if you considered all the other departments, it was much more than what was claimed formally. And therefore, the 20% of total expenditure on education that is requested in the draft is far short of fulfilling even the basic aspirations of the plan. Then there is the other aspect of diversity and the homogenizing impulses within this document. There is also the tension, well, not the tension, in a sense, they're two different strands, and how they're going to be brought together will be very interesting because the proof of the pudding will be in its eating. The civilizational identity versus the constitutional priorities and impulses. And the other aspect is the approaches to inclusion. The most welcome transformation, as Professor Jadhav has said, is that the emphasis on a liberal education. The flexibility, the welcome flexibility for faculty and students to explore different courses, to set curricula, and to actually give free rein to creativity and innovation. And as Howard Gardner, the famous educationist from Harvard said, there are the multiple intelligences that are recognized in this document. So there's the verbal linguistic, the logical mathematical, the visual spatial, the bodily kinesthetic, the musical, the interpersonal, the intrapersonal, the naturalist, the essential. So all of these intelligences can find full play in what is proposed as part of the landscape of education. And of course, critical thinking, which provides the conceptual alphabet for democratic praxis. And the building of a community of practice. And let's not forget universities as the site of a dissenting tradition, if necessary. You wouldn't have had Galileo, you wouldn't have had Archimedes, you wouldn't have had even Newton if paradigm shifts didn't happen. And they usually happened through dissenting with the formally accepted paradigm the other aspect is that the popular notion where the physical sciences were privileged and valorized over the liberal arts and the social sciences have been reversed in this, and that's a very welcome representation. And this is where I want to quote my friend Shiv Vishwanathan, who said that the iconography of science needs to be tempered by the iconoclasm of the world of craft, the world of the biogas, the world that touches the lives of people. And please correct me if I'm wrong, Professor Jadhav, but I think it was Kancha Alaya who said that when I talked about my parents as illiterate, I didn't mean that they didn't have skills and they didn't have expertise. My mother was an expert threader. She was an expert seedler. She was an expert farmer. My father was an expert sheep herder. It's just the labors that we put upon them that made their, and this will, I think, ring true, especially for Professor Jadhav's great commitment to the vocational space, which has been so undermined in our public consciousness. I also want to say, therefore, he talked about Education 4.0 and the fourth industrial revolution. Absolutely, absolutely correct. Because it's not just the fact that blockchain technologies are going to change things, but also the Internet of Things and cognitive computing, the whole range of new disciplines which we cannot even envisage right now. How do we create a temperament that allows itself to be open to engaging with those possibilities, things that we cannot even visualize someday? But more important is, let's also be aware of epistemic injustice. For example, when we're looking at the languages, there are no African languages, there's no Arabic there. The histories of marginalized groups, there is a slight erasure. For example, history itself, by and large, or Indian history, is seen primarily as through the Shastic texts and so on. The icons who are invoked are those who have whose habiters were the higher echelons of learning. But the histories of history from below, histories of the people who really made, in some senses, what we call the warp and weft of today's Indian consciousness, those have been somewhat undervalued. Also, there are fields of studies, for example, such as Dalit studies, cultural studies, gender studies, women's studies, that in the last 3 or 4 decades have really made enormous contribution to our knowledge paradigms and in very vibrant ways. Those also, I feel, have been somewhat relegated. The 4-year undergraduate course is a very welcome, extremely welcome thing, because it gives you multiple exits, as he has said, and I don't wish to labor that further. I think I have another, do I have another 5 minutes or 3 minutes, or how much time do I have?
Yes, 5 minutes.
Thank you. The other aspect, I think, is following from this epistemic injustice idea. How do we understand merit and meritocracy today? By and large, the gatekeepers of higher education systems, the lazy man's lazy man's, shall I say, computation is merit equals marks. And we know what that has done to these dizzying cutoffs, unrealistic cutoffs. The other thing is that we don't understand, or we don't take into account, that merit is a composite of a great many social and economic advantages. So what we really need to look at is, rather than use a one size fits all or a lazy man's guide to merit, we have to look at trajectories. We have to look at the way in which we can evaluate how far someone has gone. How far has someone come? What were the struggles and the travails that they overcame? That is the resilience that we need in the 21st century, as Harari said, because it's a time of disruptions. It's a time of uncertainty. If there is any one leitmotif of our century, it is disruption and uncertainty. Now, the struggle of people who traveled so far, his own book, The Untouchables, is just an amazing, reflection of that, and the triumph. So the triumph of that whole enterprise is something that we need to. So we need to also retrieve our notion of meritocracy, or merit, actually, from being caught in the stranglehold of the growth discourse. Especially since we are talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, I think goal number 4 is not just talking about a static notion of merit. The other thing is that the monocultural idea that you see here, where, the state always wants a homogeneous domain, but it is education where we want to move out of the sclerosis of standardization. So we need a capacious heterodoxy. We need, because learning really involves a kind of not a very harmonious reverberation. Learning involves the Marxians having it out with the postmodernists, the Gandhians with the Ambedkarites, the Jungians versus the Freudians. That is the rhythm of learning. So to impose a sterile uniformity where a much richer heterodoxy exists, I think is something we really need to watch out for. Then equity and inclusion. I think this is such an important issue. There is a great deal of, shall I say, reference to this in the policy, and that's very laudable. But underlying, I think the underlying assumption is that all of us in higher education spaces need to decolonize the mind, both in terms of practice and otherwise. No amount of programs and projects or schemes, whether they are stride or whatever they are, is going to fix this, because education is not charity, it is a right. And the fact that there are words like upliftment of URGs or the unreserved groups uh, is a fairly paternalistic kind of phrase, because what people want is dignity, people want justice, and I think those things we need to. So when you talk about URGs, you're assuming there is an ORG that is well placed and it can be left to its own devices. Now, what about URGs? Are we through these special economic zones, special education zones, are we, and this is a question, I could be completely wrong, are we ghettoizing the so-called URGs further? Are we making sure that they live in their special little enclaves where their interaction with the wider world gets doubly disadvantaged? And I think Professor Jadhav's suggestion that they should be located near, on the outskirts of metropolises, like for example, Jamshedpur was before the Tatars actually came in, and give them access to a world that they want to explore. Why keep them confined to just a particular community where they have some icons within their community? So further insulating them and making it a kind of what I would call, or what I think a scholar has called, the narcissism of caste identities. There is a glossing over of the inequalities of caste. Caste is not mentioned. Maybe that is a deliberate intention. However, we really need to know that class, caste, gender combine in particularly combustible ways, along with religion, to create oceans of privilege and oceans of disprivilege. We all know what has happened, for example, in the Rohit Vemula case, or even in the Payal Tadvi case, where alienation is there for the doubly disadvantaged people much more. And we cannot look at the digital explosion as the panacea for all, because there is the digital divide, as you recently saw in a tragic death of a young student. Multidisciplinarity is often repeated. The Bank of Credit is a great idea, but what are these? What is this multidisciplinarity that we are talking about? Is it a perspective? Is it a perspective that sees connections? For example, Daniel Pink had said that the future belongs to a very different kind of mind. They are meaning makers, they are empathizers, they are pattern recognizers, rather than people who are filled with a particular set of data and so on. Although data analytics is something which has become so important today. I know I'm going on for much longer. There are several other things, affirmative action. We need to get beyond the solipsism of quotas and look at affirmative action really in the broadest possible sense, rather than the number crunching of quota politics. We need to evolve an equilibrium between structure, the disciplines of structure, and democratic space. Internationalization is something that Professor Jadhav, in his own, as Vice Chancellor of Savitri Phule University, has done so much to support in this country. There is a great deal of misunderstanding about what constitutes internationalism. We need to work at it as investing in India's soft power for the future. Every international arrangement is something that enhances our global footprint in a positive way, not just being what they call a knowledge superpower. That superpower sort of aphorism is not something that sits too well. We want to be able to influence international discourse and debate, make friends. Why is it that there is so much of a lag between the student who are coming in, even from our neighboring countries? In the 60s, we were far ahead of China. Today, Singapore and even Malaysia claims many more international students, not to mention China, of course. So what is it that we have forgotten? The Americans invested in this in a big way as part of their security policy. They won friends through their universities and so on. This interaction, intermingling of ideas is core to opening the universe of the mind. And I'd really like to thank Professor Jadhav. And one particular statistic which must bother us is that about 7.5 lakh Indian students seek universities abroad for their education, and they cost the exchequer something between $7 to $13 billion a year. So, is there something that we are missing out in this, and do we need to look at it? The other, of course, as Dr. Jadhav said, there are how will the new regulations pan themselves out? There are so many centralized bodies, and how will the relationship between them be worked out? You know, there'll be usual turf wars, there'll be the usual infrastructure and so on to house so many new people. So there are so many of them. I, for one, haven't been able to figure my way out of the labyrinth, Professor Jadhav. Maybe I need to have a tutorial with you to help me figure them out, because there is NTA, there is, as you said, Parak, there is GEC, there is NHERA, there is NRED, NRF, NIA, NAC, and so many other, RISE, NETF, NCIVE. How will these all work together in a manner that will enable? I know I'm running out of time. There's so many other things, but I just want to end on one particular issue that's very important for me. And that is Maya Angelou said once that my purpose in life is not just to survive, but to thrive. And I want to do that with some passion, some compassion, some humor, and some pride. And I'm therefore coming to this whole business of gender sensitization. There are 16 places where the new policy talks about gender, but it's usually clubbed with women. There are 26 places, or 2 to 3 pages each, where Professor Jadhav's book refers to gender in the proper sense of the term, as a power equation, as a social construct which involves both men and women. Now, in the higher education space, we expect progressive ideas on gender justice. And it's not just about the violence of sexual harassment, it is the violence of exclusion. Because we have today something like 48.6% of the higher education space inhabited by women, 42.4 faculty who are women. However, as you go up the hierarchy, the number dwindles. There is a drop in the female labor force, as you know, many of them coming from graduates who have actually graduated. We did the Saksham report, of which I was a part, showed rampant cultures of silence and impunity and patriarchal norm prevalent in higher education spaces in India of the kind you will never imagine. We went through the length and breadth of India and we were aghast. And even in the state of Kerala, which has some of the best indices, development indices, you would have been horrified to look at the kind of apartheid that existed against women. So not just women, but men too need to be trained in gender sensitization in colleges and universities. I would recommend, as NAC has recommended, a gender audit. It has asked for gender audit in one place, in a sort of paragraph somewhere towards the end, but it's not really aware of how these audits take place. And we have worked out a kind of formula where you look at organizational structure and culture, you look at curriculum, you look at hiring practices, you look at student services, you look for simple things, that who gets to speak at particular conferences, what is the arrangement in which women's research is valued. Or it's wonderful that your school is so gender sensitive and you have a woman as head and doing so well. But not many. There are only 15 or 18 universities in India that have women vice chancellors. So I'd stop there, but I do want to say that what Professor Jadhav has recommended is that, what he has said is that the real voyage of discovery lies not in seeking new landscape, but having new eyes. And he's also flagged, where is the life we've lost in living? Where is the wisdom we've lost in knowledge? And where is the knowledge we've lost in information? But we will we will look at the amazing possibilities or the universe of possibilities rather than limits that the document affords us. It is, as he said, for us really to seize the time and to seize the hour. And there is a whole world to be won. And I would request you all in this context, when we look at inclusivity, we look at merit, we look at autonomy. That's another issue I wanted to speak about, but there's no time. We have to be able to take autonomy for ourselves. The battle of freedom is never ended, and the field is never quiet. So the more we abdicate our ability to engage to larger external bodies, the more we are giving away that thing called autonomy, which is so integral to the land of the mind, to the universe of the mind. Everyone talks about sa vidya ya vimukte, which is that alone is knowledge. That alone is knowledge which liberates us. But how much are we willing to be liberated? Do we still live in colonial mindsets, or can we break free of them? So these are the questions that I pose before you. And there's so much wealth that Professor Jadhav's book has opened up, a universe really. So Mala, thank you very much. And I think we should have several more webinars with other speakers and Professor Jadhav so that we can all benefit from the wealth of wisdom that he brings. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gopinath. May I now request Professor Petri to...
Yeah. Thank you, Mala.
If there are any questions, then please put them in the chat box. I had none so far. I think everyone is mesmerized. So let's...
Yes. Thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor to speak on this occasion. The only problem is I'm feeling like a batsman who has to come after Bradman and Tendulkar, and with the ball swinging. So it's going to be a journey from the sublime to the ridiculous now, because I too was mesmerized listening to the earlier speakers, especially Meenakshi ji. I'm always amazed at the energy that Dr. Jadhav brings to the table whenever he is involved with anything. And in his multifarious business and other issues, despite all of that, he has been hugely prolific with his written work. This book is a product of his love, a labor of love over an extended period, with an appendix that happened because of a disruption, which led to the NEP coming at the right time. And that he was able to provide that very important, insightful part of it. This book of his has data analysis, it's got critical inputs, and it's at once derived from deep conceptual understanding, as well as showing his acumen and understanding as a policymaker. And this is no surprise, because to some of us who were involved with him, and he involved us when he helmed the high-powered steering committee of the 12th five-year plan as the member in charge, we could already see all that in him firsthand. Although the book discusses all the facets, and today Dr. Jadhav did mention a little bit about the early child education, etc. I'm going to focus nearly on what I think I know a little bit about, which is to do with higher education and in the context of NEP. He makes that distinction which he made today between the report and the policy. Clearly, the report was large, and then it could have been bigger to accommodate the other things that he mentioned as missing, and then policy could have been derived with it. He has also overviewed and critiqued both the policy and the report in the book, and he has suggested a way forward. So the first general point that I want to make is, which is both a description and a critique, that the transformational as the NEP is, it presents a laudable comparative static picture, but says very little about the detailed dynamic path in terms of prioritized action plan that will take us from here to there. This is a point that Jadhav made, which I want to underline. I don't know whether it's a critique, maybe it was not expected, and now it's supposed to be done by others. More importantly, it is rather thin in discussing the very important concern of resources that will be called for, and realistic resource envelope that could be made available, so that the recommendations are in the realm of what is doable over a period of time. Now it's very conveniently talked of 10-year, 15-year horizon, but you have to get to that in a stepwise mode. And every year you will have, every period of it, you will have to provide for resources in a meaningful manner and take stock. In any discussion today, we cannot but take the cognizance of COVID-19. And there has been much loss around and certain changes in pedagogy and evaluation that have been willy-nilly forced upon us. Even with our capacity limitations, we have tried to cope. By that, I mean the teachers and the students and the administrators. Now, rather than thinking about taking the path of reaching the pre-COVID levels and then building up, the question is whether we can leverage this episodic mishap and leapfrog towards something which is in sync with what is expected by the new economic policy, education policy. For example, can we revisit the question of the size of the university? Because on one hand, it's talking about reducing the number of institutions, but having them large. On the other hand, it's talking about expansion. The two will need to be reconciled. To my mind, it is quite possible if we think out of box and have hybrid kind of models and have innovative ideas like vertical universities or virtual universities. Some of them already exist in the world and they are quite brilliant. Liberating us from the land footprint requirements, especially in places like Mumbai and Pune, where land is a very, very costly matter. And to expect people to have now 500 acres that Dr. Jadhav could rule over, it is very difficult now for going forward. And we simply can't replicate and have more of the same going forward. Now, can we now think, therefore, of hybrid pedagogies and institutions and organizations that would and focus singularly on the outcomes that are there? Not a very easy thing to do, but that is what is, I think, meant in the, or expected perhaps. Maybe I am overreading it, but that's what is expected in the NEP. It is well emphasized that autonomy, flexibility, and quality, following the adequacy, equity, and efficiency kind of a triad, is what is going to be the greatest challenge going forward. The problem is, even to approach this requires a major mindset change. And I think Meenakshi ji mentioned that passing, in a highly bureaucratic and control-oriented system, will our readers and authorities learn to let go? For example, we talk of autonomy, and Meenakshi ji made this very important point that we have to take it, and we try to do that. We try to push the envelope. I have found, for example, in my experience, that if you ever go to the authorities and ask, can I do it? They will never say yes. They'll say this rule, that rule. On the other hand, what I call as the Ambani method, which is to do something which we believe is right, and then ask the lawyer department, legal department, or the authorities in our case to now fit it within the rules, then that works even in the government, at least at the marginal levels. We'll have to try to do something like that going forward. Let me also talk about organizational and institutional structure, which is very, very comprehensive. Some of it, the two issues are that there is something that we have already, and that is to get the legacy institutions merged seamlessly with the new kind of organizational structure that we will have. Some things like the NAC and the NUPA and the NCRT. On the other hand, there is RSA, MERA, HEGC, NRF, which are all laudable objectives. But we need to take a moment and learn something from the earlier experience. Dr. Narendra Jadhav will remember that Kapil Sibal tried to do this almost the exact thing with some 9 different bills. And I've heard Dr. Jadhav talk about those at an ORF function long ago. And but they didn't see the light of the day. We will need to learn something out of that. And just because the current government has a majority, it's not going to work just because of that. It would have to happen through cooperative federalism and the center, states, and everyone coming together and modifying and compromising a little bit, except for the absolutely uncompromisable principles that we have. Uh, the one thing about RSA that Jadhav Sahab talks about as a very good thing, I agree that, having Prime Minister at the helm gives it a gravitas. So does the State Council for Higher Education that we already have. Now we call in Maharashtra, we call it Maher or something like that, which is headed by the CM. It becomes heavy-headed. But in my experience, the problem with such heavy committees is that they don't meet, because these gentlemen at the top are so busy that unless the prioritization is right, and at the state level especially, unless education and higher education gets the priorities, such committees become dysfunctional precisely because they are headed by, I think, chief ministers and such other people. So that's a point that one needs to consider. Now, we know that any good report must be knowledge-based, empirically evidenced, and participatory. And this one, as Dr. Jadhav, and I completely agree with him, is weak except on one count. It has been extremely participatory, but knowledge-based and evidence empirically, no. Because it's not as if we are starting with a clean slate that we are trying to invent the wheel. I mean, we have had right from Kothari Commission, Yashpal Committee, Kakodkar. In Maharashtra, we have had 3, and then a 4th one to reconcile the 3. So sometimes I think in education, the problem is not epistemic or conceptual. It's more a problem in the realm of political will and to implement the doable in a realistic fashion. But clearly this is weak as far as the knowledge base is concerned, which has led to what Dr. Jadhav talked about, the lack of analytical framework to this particular policy document. In terms of GER again, I think it is absolutely right what Dr. Jadhav said and says in his book. Getting to 50, come on. I mean, you've got such big people like Kasturi Rangan and a Princeton, young, bright Princeton professor, and so many other eminent people in the committee. Are they wasting their time to do something which is going to happen with business as usual scenario? If not, then it should have been more ambitious doing that kind of a thing. And with all these people, how did they miss out on, especially the policy, miss out on the Education 4.0, which is obvious to all of us is what is going to be the main agenda and the main issue going forward. And that is what we will need to equip our students with going forward across disciplines in different ways. But across disciplines, we will need to have Education 4.0. And that is something that we will need to go as we chart out the action plan in different states and for the nation also. In a matter of creating world-class HEIs, one lacuna has been rightly pointed out, quality PhDs and teachers. And both Dr. Jadhav talks about it, the policy talks about it, and so on. But I would think that there is still not a proper understanding of in the policy about what to do about it. Because, this is one of the rare occasions where I might actually be differing a little bit from even the great Narendra Jadhav, because he talks in his book about giving monetary incentives and such other stuff, which is important. As an economist, I can't deny. I believe in incentives. They don't need to be always monetary, and they need to be right incentives, because sometimes minor monetary incentives create perverse actions. And that is what Meenakshi ji was alluding to when she said, you make a bad law. You make something like saying that a principal should all have PhDs. I don't understand why. They should have understanding of man management and finance and organizational structures. But why should in fact, I would bet my last rupee on saying that a person who has a PhD in mathematics, and a good PhD at that, would make an horrible principal. Because he would be so much in his abstract world that he wouldn't make for a good principal who needs to do all kinds of things that are not covered by it. But when you did that, see what has happened. You had shops now created, which will now lead to people all hankering over PhDs. Once you do that, people want PhDs not for themselves, not for knowledge, but for becoming principals of a college as a part of their career advancement. Then that starts happening what Madam talked about, the 35,000 and 55,000 rupee shops that get set up. And then we have to react to it by having more codification. And more codification means more lacuna that would be found out. And that's not the way to go. You know, this is something that needs a greater insight, and I would agree with Dr. Narendra Jadhav that there is a serious misdiagnosis, at least as far as the insights provided in the report or the policy are concerned. Coming to restructuring, I completely agree with Narendra Jadhav Saab that, you know, this three-way categorization is not meaningful. I don't completely agree with him that, you know, undergrad teachers should be forced to do research with the kind of bureaucratic clamping that we have. After taking 20 lectures and doing that, it might be very difficult to expect them to do research. And if you start codifying and having NAC come in and give some points to it, what starts happening is all kinds of funny seminars where teachers are forced to read papers which are actually, to tell you truthfully, not even worth the paper they are written on. They are worse than the assignments that we will accept. So quality is the casualty here, and we need to take care of these kinds of things. And then naturally the paid journals and those kinds of things will come up, and we need to this. But there is a false dichotomy that I will agree to, and a better way of looking at it is what we did, Dr. Jadhav. You might have forgotten, but since you had made me the convener of the subcommittee under Panikar, which germinated RUSA, we had suggested that there should be a tripartite categorization of institutions as well as students. And that should be those who are truly excellent, let them fly, give them complete autonomy. Those that are average and universal, give them funding on the basis of observable indicators. And those that are starting off, let us start doing handholding. These are three different kinds of inputs. As Madam said, one size doesn't fit all. We all know that. But we need to have these nuanced policies to be kind of created. And that kind of a thing might be a better way of doing it, whether it is to do with public funding and organizational levels, as well as at the student level. You know, in the student level, if we had that, we have done something, and this is the point about inclusion. And I take in all that you say, even the technical thing, which I must say, I kind of skipped parts of it because I am very bad at reading through all the acts and 3.1 section and this and that, which you discuss, but you know best because you are the person who was involved in doing the RTE. In that context I'm talking about. But we have this habit, you know, that we start something good and without allowing for teething trouble and allowing it to take place, you know, we've forgotten Kotari Commission, Radhakrishna Committee, where they talked about, you know, that in education it requires 20 years for any reform to fructify. It may not take 20 years in today's day and age, but it will still take time. But before that, we start throwing it out. I think that is a bad thing. But coming to what I was talking about and linking at the tripartite thing, this business of inclusion, and I take in everything that Meenakshi ji was talking about, and she will probably be thinking that I'm taking a paternal view here, and maybe I am, but in a good way, I hope. But, you know, when you talk of inclusion at the higher level, what are we doing? We are creating reservations for students. We are saying, okay, don't pay fees. We give them admission and then let them be. It is very essential that handholding, mentoring, and tutoring, which is a special skill set that our teachers will need to learn for different kind of students, will be absolutely essential part that will need to be institutionalized and officially recognized. Some good teachers always do this, but they do this beyond the call of their duty. And they don't get recognized when a bureaucrat comes and starts working out the workload and doing the vacancies. And in this context, you know, great universities have a great concept of redundancy. They don't ask you how many lectures you have and divide it by 16 and say, therefore, your university, this department requires only 2.5 people. You know, you don't do that. Universities don't get made. Great universities don't happen, as you know well. But that needs to be recognized. I know there is a matter of resources to which I will come to. But the idea of mechanically distributing HEIs across geographies is not something that enamors me. Surely, as an economist, both of us will agree that we have seen the dispersal policy with fiscal incentives fail again and again. Are we not going to learn something from this? Are we not going to get the people to where good places are? Haven't we heard of migration? Haven't we heard of, and without ghettoization, I completely agree with Dr. Meenakshi. I don't like this idea of having a separate kind of place where all the so-called URGs are going to live and learn and all that. That is precisely the wrong thing and a backward step. I believe in integration, as the great Baba Sahib did. And, you know, that is where they must be part of the mainstream. They must be given specially skilled teachers who will help them to accelerate, looking at the comparative advantage and the skills they have. And that is the way they must do. Not go about doing the mechanical distribution, every tehsil, every block, every this thing. You know, we tried that. Again, we need to learn. We tried setting up central universities. Half the places don't have land. They've taken up some school and have started a university. Main problem is, where do the faculty come? Then the only way is to encroach, I mean, kind of take faculty from other places and get them there. There's a limitation. Good faculty is a major problem. They are not going to, you're not going to be able to expand in this particular manner. I don't think that's the right way to go about doing it either. So we need to do this kind of thing. Related to that, again, this whole business of setting up plans. Let the state government, I mean, we are talking of autonomy. Central government or the national policy has no business talking about it, how you should go about doing that kind of a thing. Every district, whether it should have an institution or not. Let the states work out a state action plan. Maybe some states will do what they are saying, but give them autonomy. Some may come up with something else, although I'm not very sanguine about it, because if you look at the universities and their perspective plans, I don't think they even, the authorities that be, with some glorious exceptions, don't even understand the meaning of the word perspective. They kind of list certain number of institutions that need to be started in some place because somebody has come and put pressure on them. Sorry to be blunt, but I am being less blunt than what Dr. Jadhav is, so always. So, you know, this is what happens in our kind of a situation. And this, despite the fact that there is an absolutely brilliant model document created by Narendra Jadhav about how perspective plans should be strategic and minimalistic and all that. Now, some people, what they have done is much worse. They have taken that particular model, stuck them at the cut and paste at the beginning, and their own perspective plan goes exactly later in the second half, where they talk of 2 pharmaceutical colleges, 1 year and that. You know, we need to learn about what is the meaning of words. And that's where liberal education will come handy, I think, because a lot of our vice chancellors are science people, and all these reports, they keep on having categories of patents and stuff like that that you have to do, and international journals. When our poor literature people in Marathi and English are writing brilliant critiques and books, but they are not counted, they don't work. You know, general codification, more and more codification, is an anathema to good quality. And without good quality, we will not be able to get anywhere. Let me talk. Mala, do I have 2 more minutes? She's not saying anything,
Yes,
so I
yes,
take it as
yes.
yes. Okay. As far as teacher capacity is concerned, I think we already have something called the HRDC. So rather than just talking about the, again, part of something that we suggested in RUSA, Had they bothered to look at the RUSA document, they would find that these were ready-made things that are already existing. I'm not saying optimally, but nothing works optimally in the first couple of years. HRDCs have to be strengthened, the human resource development colleges that are set up all over, and not just teacher institutions, because teacher training institutions are meant for junior colleges and schools. Whereas I am able to walk into the class with 55% marks and now maybe with a PhD, and I'm assumed to have all the skills required to be a good professor or a teacher. Whereas the Montessori teacher requires basic skills. This is a bad thing. And this is where HRDCs will need to be strengthened. And the pedagogic innovations that we need to have now will have to be done. Some HRDCs like mine in the university are doing a great job. I think we need to strengthen and build on it. I've talked about the scale. That scale is not to be more for less. We need to think innovatively about scaling up and not do more of the same. But recognize that incentives matter and check the parallel system that is there. Sometimes I think we are peculiarly hypocritic in our country. We just don't recognize the elephant in the room that we have. We talk of caste system, we say, okay, unko reservation de do. Then my daughter will go and pay 60,000 rupees in a coaching class and get her admission somewhere. Now, the point that you made is very, very important, but you just spent one sentence on that. The light and tight regulation with transparency. I mean, look at it also from the private sector point of view, please. Don't always paint them as villains, because the state is not going to be able to do all that we are expecting from here. But have light and tight regulation. Tell them, okay, you charge this with this caveat, so that there is some inclusion there also. And then let them charge the fee. Otherwise, we end up charging so little for the courses that we are allowed to do in state universities that we are in a permanent financial crisis. So some part of it can be utilized as resource raising measures, which is there in the government resolutions, is seen as sinful. I think we need to get away from that mindset. And I'm sure that Dr. Jadhav would be agreeable to what I'm saying here. Comparative federalism and trust towards private sector, absolutely important. Well-formulated policy, supervisory checks, accountability, transparency, but from a distance. And that is where, again, RUSA had said that we want an arm's length institutional framework so that the government doesn't interfere every time. Of course, the government has the position there where it says that, listen, we are picking up the pay tab, we are picking up 97% of your charges, and then you tell me I can't say anything, not on. The ministers always say that to me whenever I have the chance to talk to them. So I think I'm going to stop here. There are some provocative things that you all have said, but we are already running short of time. But I think this book is a brilliant beginning, but it's a beginning of a dialogue, I think. You have provided a nice book. I can tell you something. In the meeting the other day in my committee, where we had suggested to the government that you should set up a committee which will have, people who will be able to think innovatively and work out an action plan and a resource envelope, which is completely, finance is relegated from this book. You are talking about, you pointed out that it's in the appendix, but really that's not good enough. Just saying 6% business is not good enough. To the point that Meenakshi ji made, that, it's very little, etc. There is a further point, madam, because there isn't enough prioritization of education understood by the governments. The absorptive capacity of the governments is very less. I remember in one time, in our discussions, somebody said, you must have so much of absorption. And the Secretary Government of India pointed out, listen, you are talking of 100-fold increase. I don't mind putting it. But whatever has been granted, you are able to absorb only 40% of it. And my state, Maharashtra, unfortunately, in some study I had done, is laggard. It's one of the 14th or 15th in the major states when it comes to absorbing funds from the state government. So you don't have funds, but you don't even have, yeah, in Marathi we say dubli maji zoli, that kind of a thing. We are not even able to absorb the funds that are available. But we need to do something more and get the private sector in and think of other innovative ways of resource raising, because not by government alone. So to end, it has been a pleasure, labor of love for you to write, a labor of love for me to read through. Though, as I said, I must admit some parts I skipped through. But this is a beginning of the dialogue. In our committee, our chairman, Dr. Mashelkar, in fact, pointed out that this book of yours had reached him, and that probably will be a compulsory reading. As a member, I will be able to say that I have read that book already. So this will be an important statistical base that we will begin with, and hopefully we'll keep on referring to you again and again when we start our deliberations and get to the business. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pete. There are 5 or 6 questions, all directed to Dr. Jadhav. So maybe I can just run through some of them, and if you can respond, we can take that for 10 minutes. We could do that. So the first one is how to ensure teacher accountability. So this is a student who's affiliated to Savitribai Phule University. He has requested that his chat questions in the chat, which are long and detailed, be sent to you, which I will do. But this is one question from him, and he says he would rather prefer to learn from Swayam portal and things like that. So he's a bit disillusioned with the teachers which are there. The second question is, won't exit policy at graduation dilute the quality? The third question is that, is there any SOP for stopping dropouts? The fourth question is, will the private sector do voluntary disclosures? The fifth question is, education 4.0 is a part of implementation. So to be fair to the policy, we could, it is not to be expected to be in the policy document as such. The sixth question is that, will encouraging both teachers and students to come up with innovative methods of dissemination of knowledge actually enhance the quality of our education? I think we'll take these 6 questions, and one more which has come in: will NEP 2020 be mandatory for all schools, including CBSE, ICSE, IB schools and universities, including deemed universities who have tied up to foreign universities? So these are the 7 questions, Jadhav.
Okay, all right. Well, we are already way behind schedule, and in about 15 minutes, actually, I'm going to start another webinar where I'm going to talk about the Constitution, since this is the Constitution Day. First of all, let me thank both panelists for their wonderful presentations. Mesmerizing indeed, that was the word used. And I have rarely, if ever, seen a discussion in webinar being so productive and so useful. And I think it was a mesmerizing experience for all of us, including myself. Both panelists spoke extremely well, and the light to heat ratio was very high. I'm thankful to both of them, and I entirely agree with them in their detailed comments. And their comments are so important that we really need 1 hour discussion each on their presentations and the ideas that were thrown up in their presentations. And Professor Pete is absolutely right in saying that what this book has done is to begin a dialogue. This is the beginning, not the end. And hopefully this is a good beginning, and both
Yes.
of my list have said that. But we need to take this process further, and therefore there is a need for this dialogue to continue. And I could take these questions, but it will take a lot of time to do justice to these questions. What I would urge you is that my email ID is that you can share my email ID with them, or I can say that here, drnarendra dot Jadhav at gmail.com. drnarendra, one word, dot Jadhav at gmail.com. Please send your questions on the email, and I will do my very best to do justice to the questions, and I will try to answer. In a webinar like this, one does not expect all the questions to be answered. The very fact that many questions have been raised in your mind is actually making a beginning of addressing them. Without the webinar, probably those questions would not have cropped up in your mind. So this is a very, very good beginning of a dialogue, and I'm grateful to Professor Mala and her colleagues for having organized this discussion and organized it so well. And I want to thank all the participants who have raised questions.
Narendra ji, if you don't mind, just to say hello to Mr. Rohan, who is a student who asked you, and all others are quite experienced professors and all that. If you feel like, just spend about half a minute.
On the first question about the teacher accountability.
Yes, that's the question by a student.
Yeah. As a vice chancellor, we had different ways of achieving teachers' accountability. I do not want to go through the details, but what is important is that I have pointed out in the book that there is a kind of misdiagnosis of the crisis in the field of education that we have. I can tell you I can fully understand that this student is demoralized with teachers, and he or she thinks that SWAYAM would be a better platform to learn rather than teachers. Because what has happened is that over a period of time, two things have happened. One is that curricula have not been revised for a very long time. I know many teachers, many professors who come to class using the notes that they had taken when they were doing their master's degree, and start writing on the board without talking about it, without discussing, and without getting everybody involved. Now, this is bound to demoralize the students, and that is what has happened. So one of the very interesting things that I did as a vice chancellor of Savitribai Phule University was to revise entirely the curricula of 484 courses. And that was done with the help of the relevant industry experts outside the university. Because there is a kind of chasm between university and society. Our founding fathers had thought that the university and the society would grow in tandem. They would develop in tandem. They will be acting in a mutually reinforcing manner. That has stopped happening a long time back. And there is a disconnect between what is happening in the field of education and what the realities are, or what is happening in the society. And therefore, teachers' absenteeism or accountability is only a reflection of lack of accountability, is only a reflection of the disconnect between the education and the society, and we need to work at it. There are strategies that can be devised. What I complained was that in the 447 magazine size book, the Kasturirangan report, which forms the basis of national education policy, does not refer to teacher accountability at all, does not talk about teachers' absenteeism and the issues like that. And that was much needed, and I would like to address in Malaji. I want to thank you for providing this platform. platform and conducting this discussion, and such a wonderful discussion to be remembered by all. Thank you very much.
So as we come to the end of the program, my pleasant duty to propose the formal vote of thanks. So the NEP per se may have limitations as we have spoken about, but the fact that it has set into motion discussions such as this makes us very optimistic, sir, about the future of Indian education and the fact that it is in safe hands. Thank you very much, Dr. Jadhav, for having given us this opportunity to host the program. Thank you very much to Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath for the insights that you brought into the discussion. I'm hopeful that this first experience of yours with us is the beginning of many more interactions which we will have with you. I started off by saying that Professor Pete is our own, and hence welcome and thank yous are not going to be left out for him. However, I would like to take this opportunity to say a big thank you to him for not just agreeing to be a discussant today, but for having been a mentor to me ever since I joined this department, and especially over the last 3 years that I have held the post of the director. In fact, I can't thank you enough, sir, for the angelic patience that you have shown with me, a quality of yours which I'm sure that is a revelation to you yourself. As I demit the office of director of this department in a few days from now, I think there could not have been a better way for me than to host this discussion on the future of Indian education. A big thank you to the audience who have enthusiastically joined in today, as well as for the many programs that I have been organizing. I may not come before you as director of the department, but that hardly matters because the affection and the support which I have received are my own, and I'm sure that they will be there with me always. So thank you very much once again. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Narendra ji, we will need to talk afterwards. Sometime जरा वेळ काढून आपल्याला बोलावं लागेल. Because now I have been inducted into this, and we very much have the 4.0 education as a part of the subgroups that we have set up. We are doing it quite systematically. I hope that there will be enough people with out-of-box thinking. But let's see how it goes. I'll keep you informed, and I'll keep referring to you.
Wonderful, wonderful. In the next couple of days, I'll give you a call and let's have a chat.
Yeah, we will talk. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Meenakshi ji, this is the first time I'm seeing you, but the way you were speaking was actually captivating. I mean, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And a lot to learn about and so on. So as Mala said, I hope we will get an opportunity to listen to you. Because apart from the gender, the other thing that is missing here, which is not emphasized much, is the minorities that need a greater, and minority women especially, we need to do something special about also. But there is so much that we can talk. But thank you very much. Narendra ji, best of luck for the next program you have. And you better have something hot next to you so that your throat is okay.
Right.
Bye.
All the best. All the best.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Should I end the meeting?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Touch.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.